For rain and a thunderstorm on Thursday, the high 72. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
43 at O'Hare and sunshine. Your next news update at 8:30. Breaking news as it happens. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, and your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So Governor Pritzker says June now before we hit peak, and then all the durations would have to be met, 14 and 28 days. So as we said from the outset, looking at July at the earliest for Chicago based on what he's saying at this point. And Lori Lightfoot did him one better. She's saying, maybe never.
Yeah, exactly. Let's start with mayor haircut, huh?
No matter where we are, until there's a vaccine, until there's an all clear, which is some ways off, social distancing is going to need to continue in all forms of public gatherings. It is the only way that we know to effectively contain the spread of this virus. That's why we keep emphasizing it so much every time that I stand up and speak, every time that we're talking about any kind of activity, social distance.
Yeah. And so I hope with Major League Baseball announcing they're going to resume play July 4th weekend, that Field of Dreams in Dyersville, Iowa is available for the Cubs and Sox, because it doesn't look like they're going to be playing in Chicago.
No, and they shouldn't. And Pritzker, so they inform you, Dan, but then they throw some fear in. So this is what would happen if the measures were lifted. A second wave.
If we were to lift all of our mitigations entirely at the end of the month, modeling shows that there would be a new surge of COVID-19 and a higher R0 in each of the four regions, even in the least hard-hit regions of our state.
Right. Because
let me say this another way.
Yeah. I don't need. I got it the first time. You don't need to hear him
say the second wave.
No, I don't need to be told things twice. I don't need to be told things twice. I'm not a member of the Chicago Press Corps. Let me respond to what the governor said. Flatten the curve. What does that mean? What does flatten the curve mean? What did they say, and all the policy experts say, was the point of flatten the curve?
To keep hospitalization beds or hospitalizations low and steady, and that makes sure that we have enough ventilators and ICU beds, which we do.
And to buy time for treatment.
Right. Sorry.
It was never advertised as a way to eliminate the existence of the virus. Never. It's being treated like it was. It wasn't. With respect to hospitalizations in Chicago, Northeast Illinois, Chicago, one of the four quadrants he created, the four kingdoms of King JB of House Pritzker,
when you say that.
Chicago's not meeting the below 20% infection rate in order to reopen. He said the hospital rates aren't where they need to be and stuff. I'm looking at data from IDPH, hospitalizations 4,900 plus April 29th. 4,200 plus May 9th.
Yesterday there were 4,300, down from 4,800 2 days before.
Yeah, significant. And you're going to have, so you're going to have a little bit down, a little bit up, a little bit down, a little bit up. So this is what they call the plateau, because they know so much. No, they don't. They don't. COVID deaths, we've seen massive decline over the last few days. 176 on May 5th, down to 53 on May 11th.
54 yesterday.
And so, and oh, by the way, total capacity for the system, because remember, flatten the curve, don't overwhelm the system. We have a super majority of ventilators in our possession available for use. We have about half of hospital beds available that to be used, not 50-50 or so. We also know the plurality of deaths in Illinois have occurred so far in nursing homes, long-term care facilities, which have, frankly, little to do with the overall healthcare infrastructure.
If you took out Cook County, 65% of all the deaths in Illinois are nursing home deaths.
And oh, by the way, here's what's happening on the economic side as House Democrats prepare today to throw a few $1 trillion around in funding money. $1 trillion in aid to state and local governments, $1 trillion to businesses, people suffering financially during the pandemic. You had a proposal from Reparation H, Comrade Bernie and Ed Markey, give Americans $2,000 a month during the coronavirus, with payments to parents of $2,000 per child for up to 3 children. So that could be $120,000 a year, up to $120,000 a year. For residents making up to $120,000 a year, $2,000 per month, and $2,000 per child for up to 3 children. So that's $8,000 right there.
Yeah.
That's almost $100,000
I better start having more babies.
to not work.
Yeah.
That's a proposal coming from Senate Democrats that they're in part taking up today. We'll see what the House does. Oh, meanwhile, back at the ranch, public pension plans lost a median 13% in the 3 months ending March 31st, the first quarter of this year. The second quarter is not going to be better. That should remarkable. Nobody asked Lori Lightfoot about the police and fire pension funds in Chicago, both of which were less than 25% funded before the outbreak. Those are circling the drain. I mean, they were before. Now it's increased in pay significantly. Cook County estimates, $200 million shortfall. State, $7.5 billion shortfall. Sales tax revenue in April down 24% in Cook County from the year prior. Sales tax makes up a plurality of the Cook County budget. And all this leads the Civic Federation in Chicago to declare that replacement of lost revenue from the federal government will be necessary to avoid disruption of essential government services. Yeah. Essential government services. You mean paying all the state, county, city, municipal, park district, library board, picnic table inspectors to not work.
Because a lot of them are at home, and there's no talk at all of any cuts in staff sizes.
And that's what we should do. That's what we should do. Well, I will get some review on this, but there is no reason. McConnell has drawn a red line that the House Democrats don't want to cross in terms of compromising on legal indemnification of businesses that are reopening. McConnell holds all the cards. He has all the leverage. There is no reason for him to give. The beggar states like Illinois mean nothing to him in terms of his Senate majority, which means everything to him. So why wouldn't he let him twist? For more on an answer to that question, we're pleased to be joined by Charles Lehman. He's a social issues and policy writer for the Washington Free Beacon. Charles, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, folks. Thanks for having me on.
How do you solve a problem like Illinois? You write at the Free Beacon. You must be a Sound of Music fan. What?
I was thinking the same thing.
What about that? You don't solve it. Illinois either solves it, or it's imposed. The solution is imposed on them.
Right, and as you just outlined, obviously Illinois is sort of in a. There are two things going on. One is that Illinois, among other states, is being hit particularly hard by both budget shortfalls or revenue shortfalls because of the coronavirus, at the same time that the states are being asked to step up and be the sort of frontline responders to the coronavirus. So they have to spend more and they bring in less in taxes, which is a recipe for disaster. At the same time, as you mentioned, Illinois has the third least well-funded pension system in the United States. One of the folks I talked to in the story that you referred to described Illinois as a pension system with a government attached. And so the state had the opportunity to shore up its finances over the past 10 years since the Great Recession to prepare for the inevitable financial catastrophe that comes every 10 years or so. And it basically didn't. And now they want to bail out from the federal government. And I think the big fight that's going to go on over the next several weeks in Washington is, should we give them money? Should we not give them money? And if we do give them money, what should the terms of that money look like? Where Illinois is going to need more money than other states that are more fiscally responsible, red states and blue states. So I think that's going to be the big fight, is what are the terms under which the federal government gives money to states, if any?
Well, Governor Pritzker said last week he needs money to pay police and fire and essential first line workers. And I don't know if I buy that, but I don't know what their budget is and what the books are. So he's tugging at the heartstrings of people.
The $5 billion that the state of Illinois got under the CARES Act can be used to pay frontline workers if that's what the governor wants to do, police, fire, and teachers. Steve Mnuchin said that more than a week ago at the town hall, that they've been given that latitude. So that's not enough. That's just a cover story for the money that he's demanding for other means. Money's fungible. Here's the problem. It actually doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if Illinois, in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter if Illinois gets even something approximating what they're demanding. It is a drop in the bucket. $1 trillion that House Democrats are banding about for state and local relief. Well, obviously, 25% of that isn't going to come to Illinois, which is about what's necessary. So give us $2 billion. Give us access to the municipal facility the Fed setting up to borrow another couple billion. Give us $5 billion. Give us $10 billion. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Well, $200 billion in unfunded health care and pension liabilities that were going up at just about a 45-degree angle during good economic times. All you're doing is lighting money on fire, and so it just staves off doomsday for us for 3 months, 6 months, 8 months.
Right, and I think the argument is that Illinois' approach to pensions has been for some time mathematically unsustainable. The present contributions are too small, and the future obligations are too big, and that's how things add up when you have to have a balanced budget. I think part of how Illinois and many other state pensions have dealt with this problem, because many state pensions have this problem, is that they've made riskier and riskier investments over the past 10 years, which is why state pension funds lost something like 21% of their value in the crash a month ago, as compared to the average 401k lost about 11%. And the reason is because state pension funds are more exposed to risk.
Yeah.
And they have to be more exposed to risk because they need to make returns because they aren't investing enough money up front. So it certainly seems like there's some issues with fiscal responsibility among state pension fund managers, and that's a political problem.
Yeah, the pension fund should have bought for the last, couple of decades, they should have just bought Illinois bonds if they were looking for yield. But here's the thing about this with respect to Illinois. Andy Biggs over at the American Enterprise Institute made this point, and he sits on the management authority for Puerto Rico. Said we're having a real problem in Puerto Rico reorganizing that territory. Different than happened in Detroit, where municipal workers took about a 4.5% hit on their pensions, and bondholders obviously took a hit. They reorganized in Detroit before the pandemic was picking back up. A bit of a success story coming out of bankruptcy. Puerto Rico isn't. And he said to me that the problem is culture. If you don't change the political culture, then it doesn't matter what you do. You can have all the great ideas in the world. You can reduce the 3% COLAs or eliminate them altogether. It doesn't matter. They're just going to come back because no lessons have been learned. And Puerto Rican officials that he's dealing with have not learned any lessons from their bankruptcy. And it's clear from the pronouncement from politicians named Pritzker and Lightfoot, as well, frankly, as de Blasio and Cuomo, that they haven't learned any lessons either.
Yeah, I mean, so I've talked to Andy too, and what he said to me, and I think that's accurate. That there has to be either you prioritize long run fiscal stability or you prioritize paying out now and dealing with your problems later. And it seems like many state pensions, actually it seems like New York is reasonably well funded, but it seems in general many state pensions are choosing the latter model rather than the former model. Andy's point to me was he sits on the board that oversees Puerto Rico's debt restructuring, as you mentioned, and it seems like it's a giant mess. Asked about should Illinois be allowed to go bankrupt, his response was no, that letting states go bankrupt is a giant catastrophe. And so the question is, if the states won't impose fiscal responsibility on themselves, can the federal government use this as an opportunity, and should the federal government use this as an opportunity to impose that fiscal responsibility on them as a condition of bailing them out?
Right. No, I know. We had the same conversation. I disagree with him on that, but he makes a substantive point, and so it's a worthy discussion. But here's the thing, and I put this to Andy too. What does a bailout look like? Before the outbreak, $130 billion in unfunded pension liabilities, just unfunded pension liabilities, again, that we weren't keeping pace with during years where the Dow returned 25%. So what is the scale you're willing to go? I mean, it's like the problem gambler. Unless you're going to give me $100,000, I need to pay off my bookie. There's no sense in giving me $2,000 because I can't do anything with it except lose it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are a number of measures that I've heard folks propose over the last couple of weeks that will put a dent. So state governors, the National Governors Association has $500 billion across the board. Some of that would go to Illinois. That would cover shortfalls. But in order to deal with the longer-term problem, you're right that there isn't – it would take an enormous amount of money for the federal government to step in and solve the problem wholesale by simply whisking away the future obligations. On the other hand, there are a number of changes that Illinois could conceivably make with the aid of the federal government. So, for example, federal law can preempt the Illinois state constitution and permit reductions in benefits,
right,
which are currently not permitted. The federal government can require Illinois to switch over from a defined benefit system to a defined contribution system to put everyone on a 401k, essentially, which I have, I assume you have, and those work okay, but they're far less generous,
right?
Which is good for the taxpayer. So there's certainly, on getting on the path to fiscal responsibility, the federal government can point Illinois in the right direction, which helps solve the problem more than just giving them money does.
Right, but here's the problem that you have politically then. The amount of money that the federal government is going to have to create and spread around in order to paper over their bailouts of states like Illinois. So right now, I talked to Jonathan Williams, chief economist from ALEC. You have 1,500 legislators from around the country who've signed essentially a resolution: do not bail out these states that are nearing pension default because of their own choices. Of course, talking about the states we all know: Illinois, Connecticut, Kentucky, New York. And so think about the buy-offs that would be required to get all of these legislative caucuses and congressional delegations on board with anything material for the states that have these huge unfunded pension and healthcare liabilities. So to me, it's just bad public policy. You're essentially acting fiscally recklessly and perhaps monetarily recklessly in order to impose fiscal discipline on Illinois. What kind of sense does that make?
Well, so I think that we're in a weird situation now, right? And there's a high risk of cascading failure, which is the argument for the government spending big right now and dealing with the federal government spending big right now and dealing with the problem later. So I talked to Mark Goldwine, who does policy of the Committee for Responsible and Federal Budget. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which is like the Hill's #1 deficit hawk. And he said to me, yeah, they should totally be borrowing right now. Now is the time to do it. They shouldn't have borrowed $1 trillion before now,
right,
but now it's totally the time to be taking on big money. And it's the case that the recovery after the Great Recession was slowed in part by the amount of austerity that state governments were forced to take on. We know that on the one hand, the government's creating a lot of money right now. On the other hand, Bloomberg said today that inflation expectations declined by 0.5 percentage point, like we're facing deflation. So I'm not as concerned about the risks of taking on big deficits or monetizing those deficits as I might be at a different time. I think it's correct to say that it's hard to impose long-run fiscal responsibility using short-run fiscally irresponsible decisions, but it seems like those short-run fiscally responsible decisions are as much about forestalling even bigger cascading failures as they are about trying to get the house in order in the long run.
Yeah, but cascading failures, this is why we have 50 laboratories of democracy. A cascading failure in Illinois is a localized failure. A cascading failure at the federal level is a failure that's spread across the 50 laboratories.
Well, if we think that we're likely to have a failure at the federal level, I don't think the federal government's going to be defaulting on its debt anytime soon. And I am worried about the cascading failure in Illinois is a big harm to all the people who live in Illinois.
Yeah, well, I understand. I know it's one of those, you get the representation you chose and the consequences that follow, sort of lessons about federalism that perhaps need to be imposed as well. If fiscal discipline is ever going to be part of the culture in places like Illinois, California, New York, Connecticut, Kentucky, et cetera. I don't know. It's a really interesting conversation. And I appreciate it. It was fun playing devil's advocate with you. Charles Lehman, social issues and policy writer for the Washington Free Beacon. Charles, great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. I enjoyed the conversation.
Take care.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.
This is attorney Stephen Leahy. This isn't the first crisis we faced together. Back in 2008, business professionals in trouble sought help from bankruptcy attorneys, loan modification attorneys, foreclosure defense attorneys, and IRS attorneys trying to gain full financial recovery. They should have just called me. Let me tell you about Chuck. His small business crashed in the 2008 crisis. He faced 2 foreclosures, overbearing creditors, and the dreaded IRS. Chuck would not even get out of bed in